fucking car, man. Stop.
Please help!
Are we gonna help him?
No.
Stop!
This has gone too far. It has to stop.
Where is he?
We'll get through this.
I know.
Welcome back, everybody, to Real Time for the Real Everyday Movie Fan. I am, of course, Josh Williams.
And I'm James Sheridan.
Thank you so much for joining us here today because we are here to give you our spoiler-heavy review of The Last of Us Episode 4 entitled, I've decided to do a little title called Please Hold My Hand. Very interesting title. And I think it makes sense given the fact of this episode. I think it makes perfect sense. Now, folks, before we get into this review, if you like what you watch and you like what we provide, and you may hear my daughter here every now and again, please be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you receive all of our great content we have for you here on Real Time. So now, let's get into this here. We'll start off here, James. Who are some of the new cast members that were joined here for this episode?
Well, we've got Melanie Linsky, who I'm not familiar with, but apparently she's sort of known as the character Kathleen. Jeffrey Pierce, who was Tommy in the video games and is playing her sort of right-hand man, Perry.
Okay.
We have, I think it's Kevin Woodward as one unnamed character and Lamar Johnson as another unnamed character that I think for the sake of brevity, we're not going to talk about them because they'll be in the next episode kind of thing.
Yeah. But they're in this.
They're in this. They're very important. Of course, we've got Pedro Pascal, Bella Ramsey, some other Yeah.
Now, like James has said before, this is your spoiler warning now. We will talk spoilers in regards to this episode only, not what's in the future, because as noted, we will reference things from the game because we have played the game. I think I played it twice. How many times have you played it? I don't think I've ever asked you. You played it once?
I've only really played it once, but I've watched it several times.
Yeah. So I played it twice, and I've watched it another time, just like separate. I actually watched it before this to give myself a refresher because it's been a while since I played the game, the first one. But yeah, this is your spoiler warning here. So if you haven't seen this episode 4, go back, watch it, and join us here in this conversation. So now let's break it down here, James. I think last episode I went first. I'm gonna let you go first. So to start us off here, they got the truck. They're hauling along, and so what was your take as the episode overall and your overall thoughts?
Before we begin that, I want to revise my score from last week.
Okay.
I gave it a 9.5, but after reflection, having watched it again, having shown it to a friend, the last week's episode was so good that I'm giving it a full 10.
Okay.
I think I gave it a 9 or 9.5 last week.
Give it 9.5 initially.
Yeah. This one I can't. It's just too good of an episode. This one was a little more pedestrian, and that's not a bad thing necessarily. But we're starting to move into more of the meat of the story at this point, and because of that, things are, I don't want to say they're slow moving, but like the first 2 episodes had the benefit of like having to set everything up, so they had to move through a lot of information, whatnot, very quickly. Third episode was, of course, a bottle episode, but it was a very beautiful episode, and very important to the themes of the show. This one, we're getting into the meat of it, and there's a lot of really good stuff in here, but it also felt a little less impactful kind of thing.
I can see what you're saying.
It feels like it's a first part of a 2-parter.
Yeah,
so
I can
like
see what you're
half
saying
of
there.
The story at this point.
For moments like these in seasons, I love these parts because for me, you're getting, especially in this story. I'll give my thoughts here after you finish this, but just real quick on this one. Oh, sorry, you hear my daughter in the background. I apologize. We do what we can as parents, but sorry. I love these types of seasons, like this part of seasons, because especially for this, you get into the meat. Right now, we're getting to the meat of the relationship between Ellie and Joel. Like they're starting to expand that a little bit more as far as the characters between their separate characters, but also the slowly, are they going to be close? Are they not going to be close? Is he finally going to let his guard down? You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, the cracks in the armor are starting to show.
And I love character moments like that, but I'll get to that more for myself. But continue, James.
Yeah, I'm in agreement of that. Like, this is the stuff that I enjoy, but at the same time, in relation to the last couple episodes, it feels a little more pedestrian. So I'm going to rate it a 9. again, because it's sort of it's like the first part of a two-parter, and we're like introducing elements that we're going to explore further in what I assume will be the next episode. Probably not the episode after that, because I'm actually getting a little concerned about the pacing of the show and how much story there is left to tell, because we're almost at the halfway point here. The next episode will be the halfway point, because it's a 9-episode season, and like there's still a lot of stuff that we have to go through, stuff that they've absolutely teased.
You don't think they're going to separate the first game into 2 seasons, do you?
I don't know if there's enough material to do that necessarily. So I'm worried that they're going to start kind of like combining stuff and rolling through stuff more quickly, which would be disappointing. But like at this point, they've done everything just so well that I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt. Anyway, this isn't about my complaints about the future. It's just sort of like that was a thought that occurred to me. Like we've got so much left to tell.
It's a valid point, though. It's a valid point.
And like we're just getting to certain parts of the story right now. This, of course, much of this story did end up happening in the game, but we get introduced to new characters like Kathleen, and some of her people, because that wasn't really part of it.
No, not
like
at all. Actually, this is another episode where they take huge liberties with the game.
But at the same time, are like remarkably faithful with large swaths of the game as well.
Right.
Like we talk about Joel and Ellie's relationship. There were so many little things in there, like the pun book. I was so worried they were going to cut the pun book because it doesn't actually advance the plot, but it was one of my favorite parts of the game.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad they put it in there, because it endears Ellie so much,
right,
to me as a person, because we usually just see her being the mouthy little bratty kind of little badass, and this kind of humanized her a bit for me. And it also kind of wears down the armor of Joel a little bit. And you can see that through the progression of the episode, where she's telling him terrible jokes at the beginning.
You can't help but just like laugh at that stuff and just want to be close to her. You know what I mean?
By the end, he's cracking up, and it's like
I love that moment so much.
Yeah, and
they're
just
like
laughing.
Busts up laughing. And I can't remember the joke either. It's something about shitting in your jeans or something.
No,
like
it's diarrhea is hereditary. It runs in your genes.
Yeah. I love that one.
It's a great joke, and it's like I love that he cracked at that, and that like builds like. Not only does he crack at that, but they start cracking at the fact that he cracked, and like start sniping at each other a little bit.
Yep.
And I love watching their relationship develop. Another moment that was great, just pulled right from the game, was the magazine when she finds Bill's porn in the back, and it's like pulling at the full spurt. How does he walk with that
sticky?
thing? And those moments, like it doesn't add anything to the actual story, but it just endears us to the characters, and watching Joel just be completely uncomfortable with it. I love those little things.
But that's what's important for the game, and I think what they're doing so well so far in relation to the show is that the story and the world is important, but what's the most important is these characters and their relationship with one another, and their chemistry with one another, and they're also
that's the general appeal of this. Sorry, go ahead.
No, and there's their separation. They're separate characters alone, but that's like the heart of it all. You know what I mean? So it's good that they're taking time for that kind of thing. I like that.
Yes,
go ahead.
And that's what made the game so impactful, was watching this relationship between the two of them start off sour and grow over time, and the repercussions of both the good and bad of that relationship, what that means for the future. Again, I'm speaking in vague terms, because if you know the game, you know what happens, and you know how this relationship develops and what it means for choices coming up and events coming up and all that stuff. On the flip side, I don't know, it's beautiful to watch them kind of develop that, and there's other little moments that, like, 2 more that stood out to me was like Ellie notices that he can't hear out of his right ear very well. Yeah. And like she's paying attention to that kind of thing, and that's not something most people kind of notice unless you're like really watching somebody. So you can tell that she's like really watching him and kind of taking the lead from him. And then like there's a moment where like he's teaching her how to properly hold a gun, and on the podcast afterwards, the guys, the creators, talk about that moment, and he kind of tugs at the gun because like he's trying to show her that she's got like, if she holds the grip that he's shown her to hold, no one can take that out of her hands. And her little giggle at that is such like a kid thing to do.
Yep.
Like when they made a discovery of like, oh, it worked. Oh, I'm doing it right, kind of thing. And that giggle was like, they talked about how that was like, as fathers, it kind of like made their heart kind of like, oh,
yeah,
because like it's such a beautiful little thing, and it's a great little piece of performance by them.
Yep.
And again, furthering their development, and all of that was great.
Yep.
And of course, like the setup for the entire episode is that, they're trying to travel across country to find Joel's brother, and they get trapped in a city. In the game, it's Pittsburgh, but they said
Kansas City.
This time it's Kansas City because they couldn't make Calgary look like Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
So they had to make it look like, or the closest they could do was they figured would be Kansas City.
And I will give them
a little
props
further on their
because-
journey too.
I will give them props. They gave the right highway. They're on Highway 70, which goes from west to east or east to west. And when they actually panned up to look at the city, I was like, hey, I know that building. I know that building. Okay, you guys actually got it right. Like, I was like, hey, good job on you guys, for real.
Nice. And setting up the whole ambush, and then like setting up a situation that was very common in the game where they would sort of be pinned down by other people shooting at them and whatnot, and you've got to kind of like traverse the landscape to try and hide and like stealthily like take these guys out and whatnot. That stuff was great. Stuff like moments where they're like lifting Ellie into like some sort of hole in the wall or something so that she could climb through and open the door from the other side. That was a very frequent thing in the game, and I'm glad they included all kinds of little things like that were just great to see. And of course, like we said, like there's this whole other plot going on now with this Kathleen character who has taken over this town from Fedra and is sort of running it herself, but is like weirdly manipulative to like she seems like a very sweet woman, but she's like kind of like manipulating the people of the town to like believe a certain narrative about certain characters.
Yep.
And it's interesting to see, like, one of the things I love about zombie lore is seeing humans kind of interact when they get to like in different settlements. There'll be like very different sort of like situations and sort of political landscapes and like how people kind of run things.
Right.
And like that was one of the great things about Walking Dead was every sort of place they went was very, very different from each other. Alexandria was different from the Hill and all. Like every place was different in how it was running.
Yeah.
I love seeing that kind of thing. And this is like, we've seen how Boston's run. We know that other places kind of fell apart. This is a different situation because these people have kind of taken over, and I'm kind of interested to see how that kind of goes, because very clearly we're setting up a interesting villain here.
Yeah. Which let's talk about that at the end, because we can talk about it now. I guess it's fine because I'll give my thoughts after this. For me, yeah, she's a great villain, but she's a temporary, because we I don't want to give it. Well, the goal is to get to Wyoming. So we know, the goal is to get to this place. So even if you've never seen the game, you know that anything that's happened in these episodes is temporary. Now, whether, they come out unscathed or not, like hurt or not, that we don't know. I mean, even us now, we know what happens in the game, but they could do something else. We don't know as far as this show goes, because we've seen they're taking liberties with it, smart liberties. I will give them that, because they're changing a lot of things as far as characters and certain things. Because in the game, it's Fedra that's after shooting at him and whatnot.
It depends on the situation. Sometimes it's Fedra, sometimes it's Marauder, sometimes it's like other groups who do other things.
Yeah.
Which we'll get to later in the series, but
yeah. So for me, I thought it was a good episode. I liked. It wasn't all the bells and whistles that we've gotten before, like action pieces with like clickers or the zombie horde, or even the great love story we got in the last episode. To me, I love this episode just for the simple fact, as I said before, that you're getting to the more meat and taking the time between Ellie and Joel. Mm-hmm. We're getting to have them interact more with one another, and you see him, slowly letting his guard down a little bit, with that laugh and that joke. But even then, you're starting to see the small little bit of care for her. Like to me, taking that time to show her how to handle the gun, shows that he's like, I want her to be able to protect herself, and that to me that shows
And it was
caring.
such a fatherly thing.
Yeah, and whether he wants to admit or not, it shows that he's caring for her. And even when he says "know your cargo," that like I think it's the beginning, you can tell like Pedro Pascal did a great job acting at this moment because you could tell through his acting that Joel is saying that, but he doesn't really believe it much anymore.
No,
but he's just holding up his guard because of what happened with him and his daughter. And it's very. I mean, it makes sense psychologically. You don't want to get hurt again like that, because that was. I mean. As a father, losing, if I lost my daughter, I mean, yeah, I don't know if I would be the same after that either, So it just shows good acting on Pedro Pascal's part.
But that also comes on the heels of a great line. I can't remember exactly how he said it, but something about like she said something about like, why do you keep going if it's all bleak? And he says you keep going for family. Yeah, and that defines Joel entirely. And like that is his motivation, is to find his brother and all that.
Yep.
But like she's becoming his family now, and he's putting up that defense of like, know your cargo. But it's like you said, like you can see the cracks forming. He's not believing that anymore.
So
and I love that juxtaposition of those lines.
Yep, exactly. I'm right there with you. So I'm gonna give the same score as you. I think I'm gonna give it a 9. I still liked it. There were still some lull moments there. That I, especially toward the middle when involving the group of people. I liked it because I know what it's setting up, but I just wasn't as invested, I guess.
Yeah.
Which is, I mean, it's nothing on their part. I mean, they did a fine job. There was a really cool thing that I'm not even sure if I remember what the hell it is. But there's one big thing I loved about this show. 2 of them actually. I'll get to those, but there's one thing that just thought about it. So when they opened up that room in the basement, what's the fucking, I don't remember that from the game. What is that? I mean, I guess we can't really spoil it. I mean, we don't want to spoil it for the audience, but like, it looked like a belly, like was, you know what I mean?
So
like,
we talked about how in the game there's this whole section with Bill where they're going through the town to the school to find the battery.
Right.
And they encounter a specific creature there.
Oh, it's that? Oh, okay.
I think it's that.
Okay.
I think they're building towards that.
Because you saw the look of panic on their face, like, oh God, what do we do?
Yeah.
And like, you know what I mean? Like, it's crazy.
Because that's the thing with this creature in the game, is that it's so much harder to kill. And without going into the weeds of the spoiler stuff, there's a reason they're scared.
Yeah. One of the things I liked about Ellie's character specifically, which I think was great, it's a great different contrast from Ellie as we know in the game. And that's why I think I liked it so much that I wanted to highlight it. So in the game, I felt like Ellie had that. So Bella Ramsey and the actress, or the character within the game, they're both great at shit talking, keeping their guard up, having an attitude, all that stuff. They're both very...
Played by Ashley Johnson in the game.
Huh?
Played by Ashley Johnson in the game.
Thank you. Yeah. They're both extremely similar, like to a T. What I love, the different contrast between the two characters now. So in the game, I always felt like Ellie was a more sympathetic character, but still I didn't really see a lot of innocence. I don't know why, I just never did. I saw her as very sympathetic, given what she has to go do. But also just certain moments that you just felt sorry for her, for what she's had to grow up in. For Ellie, which I never got it in the game, for Bella Ramsey, especially that scene with the gun, she has a side of innocence.
Yeah.
Like a side of like something I just didn't notice. Like, yeah, the one from the character from the game had sympathy, but I never got the feeling of innocence.
Yeah.
And yeah, she has those moments. Yeah, she has those moments where she looks like sadistic, like when Joe was beating up the security guy, or when she has a knife. That's why I think there's so many interesting layers now to Ellie in this game, in this movie, because right there, I had a feeling of innocence that I'd never gotten before from Ellie of the game, and I liked the fact that we got it for this. This is, I don't know, what do you think?
Yeah, you have to remember that this is a child.
Yeah,
I know she's a teenager, but she's a child who has grown up entirely in this like hellscape situation. Didn't know any of the hopefulness of like life before all of this. And worse than that, she's an orphan.
Yep.
Who doesn't have a lot of friends or allies.
Or family.
Or she has no family. Until she meets Joel and they start to eventually bond. And like see, like that's why that moment to me means so much, is that you see that crack in her sort of armor, that she is a kid.
Yeah.
And she does have kid sort of reactions, but because of the world that she's lived in, the life she's had to lead,
Yep.
she's hard, she's cold, she's, distant and, abrasive. And, I was actually reading reviews for the series, and almost all of the negative reviews focused on one thing, and they were always, I don't like the kid. And it's like,
I love
okay,
Bella Ramsey
fine,
as Ellie.
sure, but like, there's a reason why she is this way. It
Yep.
makes sense for her character, and that's why that moment is so impactful, because you're juxtaposing this kid that we've known to be this mouthy, swearing, abrasive child, and you get this moment where she is actually a child, and she
And even
has
on
that
top of
childlike
that-
giggle, and it's just so sweet, and it's nice to see that she is complex and interesting.
And that adds to Bella Ramsey's performance, because if you remember I remember in the game when she would read those puns, she would laugh, but it wasn't like a childish giggle. Like with Bella Ramsey, that's where that innocence, I think, comes in, because when she's laughing at these, she's laughing like she's a little, a little kid, and that just adds that layer.
Which is
of
why I
innocence
think
to her.
it's so abrasive to Joel at first.
Yeah,
Because he's not used to kids at this point.
yeah,
Because it's been 20 years since he's been around kids frequently. And now he's having to put up with this kid. And I think that's part of what wears him down a little bit, is that she is a kid, and he's starting to have sort of like emotional memories of his daughter, and like
yeah.
what I'm sure were silly moments with her giggling at stupid things, and
But
laughing when he pulls the gun. Like, I don't know. It's stuff like that this is why I was so excited for this show, or for this game to be adapted into a show, is because of the relationship of these two and watching them grow, and seeing these little moments mean so much for just like giving us glimpses of what's underneath the surface, is why I think this show is so brilliant.
Oh yeah.
But on the flip side, it's also horrifying, because we get moments like after they're sort of like, well, during this entire opening ambush situation, when they crash into the laundromat and Joel's taking out the guys who are shooting at them, someone like surprises him from behind.
Yep. Oh yeah.
And then
that
they
scene,
they eventually overtake him, but there's this like moment where he's basically a kid himself, and it's horrifying because he's pinned down, he's been shot in the back by Ellie, probably paralyzed, because he mentions that he can't feel his legs.
Yeah.
And Joel has to kill him, and it's this like horrifying realization that he's an innocent person. I mean, he isn't, but like he got involved in all this, but like he himself is just a kid, and like
Mm-hmm.
we can't let him go for our own survival, kind of thing. And
Yeah.
I
And
know
that
they
added
cut
another-
away from that, but like
Right.
knowing what Joel had to do at that moment was like, that's the kind of gut punch that is so great about the game too, because like it's not a comfortable story in a lot of
Yeah.
aspects. There's horrible things that people have to do, and I do appreciate just how much of a moment that was.
Yeah,
to
and even
illustrate
to
that-
add to that, as far as in Ellie's character, and if you look at Ellie as at the perspective, so when she had that look of like happiness when Joel was beating up the security guard, kind of like a sadistic happy, you know what I mean? Like, so she enjoys watching violence, okay?
Mhm.
And then when she was slicing and killing a zombie, okay, so, but there's a big difference between a human and a zombie, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So when she had to be faced with shooting someone, a person, and then afterwards she did it, that shock, that almost scared shock that I actually did that. I love that it shows a psychological aspect of a human being. There's a huge difference between watching violence and
Yeah.
enjoying it, but then there's a
Portraying
huge
it.
difference between actually doing the act, and it's traumatizing to people. And a zombie, and like I said, killing a zombie is a different thing, because in your eyes, they're not really a person anymore. So it's different. But this is a real living, breathing person that she had to shoot, and she thought how she paralyzed them, whatnot. She was traumatized then, and that to me showed the depth of her character. Like maybe she realized, oh, maybe it's not all fun and games when it's when violence is happening. You know what I mean? So that kind of journey of violence in her eyes was
Yeah.
enjoyable to see, like how traumatized she was for
And
actually shooting someone.
And not just her, like Joel's reaction to it. First of all, because he kind of failed to protect her properly, didn't realize that someone was behind them,
Yep.
because of the ear thing, but at the same time, like he's not entirely comfortable with the fact that he had to kill him either.
Yep.
And like he's shaken by that, and the both of them are kind of shaken by this moment, even though they've been through all kinds of violence at this point. Just there's something about the intimacy of that kill
Yep.
that it is so unnerving. It
Yep.
reminds me of a moment in Saving Private Ryan where there's a soldier in the tower and the
Oh,
German guy has to put the knife through his heart.
dude, yeah.
And that moment has stayed with me for years because
Yep.
of just how terrible and awful and uncomfortable it is.
Yep.
I
agree.
And seeing the fear on his face, and like that, this moment they didn't show it, but it felt like that to me.
Yeah.
It felt like that same kind of visceral, just.
And I like the directing choice of not seeing, just focusing on Ellie as she hears Joel stab the guy to death.
Mm-hmm.
Like that even more adds to like you seeing her character being more traumatized with the fact that because of her shooting them, she had to watch the guy die. But at the same time, you know, they had to do what they had to do to survive. You know, that's not in a world like that. Like, I'm glad we're not in a world like that, because to be honest, when it's a world like that, it's survival of the fittest. I hate to do that, but it really is.
It is.
You know, and so it's you know, morality, while you can still try and keep it as best you can, when you're faced with someone trying to kill you, you have to do what you have to do.
You know, if you let that guy go, he's just going to bring more people, and it's going to be bigger trouble, and you probably won't make it out of it.
Yep.
You don't have a choice in that situation, and as much as I hate that,
Yep,
that's the truth.
It
is the truth.
Survival. But the last thing I want to bring up, and then I'm done with my thoughts, because I wasn't necessarily anything I didn't like necessarily. It's just there was a lot of moments, there's a few moments that dragged for me that weren't done as directorially as well as they could have been, and they probably could have been cut a little bit more. Certain scenes, especially not involving Joel and and Ellie. But the biggest thing I liked, and this is actually the only episode I really, because I went back and like kind of watched the other three. Definitely episode 3 didn't do it, but for this episode, I don't know if you noticed, but it felt like structurally it was like the video game. It's like they would go on these roads, you have talking, but then like there'd be like there'd be like a lull in the adventure, and it's like a checkpoint. It's like when they fight off to shoot the people and they go in that room, that's a checkpoint. So you know, it felt like the structure of a game. And then when they would leave that room to go walk on the streets, you know, they're having to be careful. Then they get to that one other building to go to sleep, another checkpoint. And it kind of, you know what I mean? Like it kind of did that structure. I'm like, that's kind of, it's cool when you can weave in the feeling of the game into a show, but it still works. It still flows like a show. Like, I was pretty impressed with that. That's
what I meant about like them having to like sneak through the buildings and like do stealth kills and kind of like the whole ambush situation, and then like popping through holes to like open the door from the other side. Like those are all elements of the game that were frequent, you know, sort of puzzle situations and whatnot, or like areas where you had to traverse an open area where there was a bunch of bad guys and you had to like you're like grossly outnumbered and whatnot. You've got to like take them out one at a time. Seeing that stuff kind of depicted in the show was, to me, like very faithful to the game. I also want to point out that we didn't get a flashback or prologue. This is the first episode without a flashback or prologue.
You are right. You are correct.
I think that's interesting. That we're like, I feel like we're out of this sort of like, we're clearly out of the first act. This is the beginning of the second act of the story where we get to the meat of the story.
I feel like whenever we get back to, eventually get to, oh my God, why am I blanking on his name? His brother.
Oh, Tommy.
I feel like when we get to Tommy, we may get a flashback of how he ended up out where he is.
Yeah.
I mean, Joel talked about it, but it's much different when you see it, and maybe even Joel might not be remembering everything. So we may get a flashback there. But yeah, I found that very Tommy intriguing. And maybe that's why for me I felt like it didn't flow as well, because I felt like it gave context. So when a flashback would happen, it would give context to the now of the story. Mm-hmm. It would give context and more weight or more explanation to the story. So I just maybe that's why, I don't know. But go ahead.
And this is what I was referring to earlier about like my concern about how much story we have left. They're going to spend 2 episodes on this story and a couple of characters that we experience at the end. I'm not going to say what's going to happen, but that cliffhanger is going to lead into something else, and that was a prolonged part of the story in the game, a good part of the story, an interesting part of the story, and it seems like it's going to be intertwined with this sort of like group led by Kathleen, and the complications with that. But if that's going to be 2 episodes, I'm concerned that Tommy's going to get like short run, or there's a section from the DLC that they've teased, and I hope is a prolonged, like I hope that's an entire episode itself,
Right.
because that was such a beautiful story, but it's juxtaposed with such a horrifying part of the story, that I want done well.
We will see if it plays out, but I just realized there is a moment in the game where you could technically, as a cliffhanger, end the season there and go to a season 2. You could. We'll talk about it after. We'll talk about it off camera. But
oh sure, tease the audience to a conversation they can't be part of.
You know, why not? But people who played the game, I think they know what I'm talking about. There's a moment in the game where you can cut this season off as a real crazy cliffhanger, and then go into season 2. You could.
Yes, but the problem is that if it's the moment I'm thinking of, the DLC happens after that, and they've already teased the DLC as part of
gotcha.
This season. So I have a feeling they're going to finish this season, this story within this season.
Right.
But I'm just concerned that certain things are going to be rushed or whatnot, and I want certain sections of the game to breathe and be
right. I agree.
Sort of more impactful.
But go ahead and give your overall thoughts. What are you looking forward to?
Well, I also wanted to talk about, well, I don't know how much we can actually say, but the characters that they briefly mention them and then they show up at the end. I'm very intrigued because, you know what? I'll save those thoughts for the next episode.
Save them for next week, for sure.
But
I know where you're going with.
It's an interesting thread, and interesting casting. Yep. I think the casting of one of the characters is very intriguing. And the trailer for the next episode that we've seen shows a lot of intriguing sort of set pieces from the game that I'm kind of excited for. This was, a great episode for the development of Joel and Ellie, and really that's why we're all here, in my opinion, is watching the relationship between these people. And now that we've gotten through the sort of opening chapters of the story, we can watch them grow and develop and whatnot. But they're not out of the woods either, and it's nice to see them kind of get into trouble and the consequences of getting into trouble. Like, I actually got concerned at one point because they get separated from the truck, which has all of their gear in it.
Yep.
Ellie has her backpack, but Joel doesn't have his.
Right.
And if you've played the game, you know how important the backpack is.
Yeah.
For like everything.
Right.
And it's like, I actually panicked at one point. And go, oh God, he doesn't have his backpack.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I saw that too.
And that made I love little moments like that. I'm intrigued by where this villain's thread is going to go, how that ties into the cliffhanger at the end. Great episode overall. Not as good as the first 3, but still, because we're getting into the meat of things, and the story is going to stretch. This part of the story is going to stretch out over multiple episodes. It's hard to kind of rate it as a single individual episode because it's not really a standalone episode the way the first 3 kind of were.
I agree with that.
And because of that, I have to lower my score a little bit, but it's still like a great, fantastic episode.
Yeah, it's
like
still a 9 out of 10 for crying out loud. Yeah,
this show is still the best thing on TV right now, in my opinion. And I'm excited to see where they go with it. And I'm so glad that there's surprises for people who play the game. Like, there's entire plot points that are completely taken out of the game, and they've expanded on characters that were barely in the game, and now we've got characters who weren't in the game and are going to be important to the story. And it's like, I love that. I love that there's surprises for us, and it's still a thrill to watch all of this happen.
Oh yeah, I agree. And like I said, I like this episode too. It's just maybe that the fact that this does feel like more of a setup film episode than the previous ones, because it looks like they are going to stretch this part of the story out a little bit. Maybe that's why my score is lower, and I feel like it was dragging a little bit in certain spots. But it doesn't take away the fact that still episodes go great. There's so many things I loved about it, especially with Ellie and Joel, and just the details they put into this show. I mean, it's miraculous. Like, I'm still always blown away. Like, when they're, especially now they're on the road, how they make, like, it must be through editing and CGI, how dystopian they make it look, and how It just
I
looks
love
amazing.
the production design.
Its
Just
production
the
design is
look of
amazing.
everything is so good. Like how they make someone posted photos of the show and the same places in Calgary
Yep.
like today, and it's like I don't know how you grunge that up and like make it look okay again afterwards. I
Right.
was like, how much of that is CG versus how much of that is practical? Because I know they shot a lot of practical stuff for this.
Yep.
But like you can't make cityscapes like that without some level of models or CG, and I don't think they've got a model budget on the show. And
Yep.
it's like it all looks so good, even from like the store, the like hair salon they were in the first game, or in the second episode, the beginning of the second episode.
Yep.
Looked just like something out of any of the malls that you walk through in the game, and it's like they've made the game physically real, and that's so exciting to me. I just love every inch of this.
Yep. But I'm excited for the next episode. Guys, remember a reminder, the new episode will be airing on Friday at 9 because of Super Bowl Sunday. So make sure you check it out on Friday at 9, and we will get you guys our review hopefully that very next day. But that'll do us for today, folks. Thank you very much for watching. More importantly, what did you think of The Last of Us Episode 4? Leave your comments in the section below. You can go spoiler heavy with it. Give us your positives, your negatives, and your score out of 10. Also, if you like what you watched, hit that like button right there. Subscribe to the channel so you receive all of our great content we have for you here on Real Time. Again, I'm Josh Williams.
I'm James Sheridan.
Thank you for keeping it real
With Real Time. Good night.
Good night.